Good morning, everyone. You get the joy of a double act from the National Audit Office. I bet you'd have signed up for that when you paid your money for the conference. I'm Alec. This is Kevin, my colleague. And over the next half hour or so, we'd just like to share a little bit of the work that we've been doing to try and understand some of government's business problems. What we'd like to do is go through some of those things, but maybe give you food for thought. And that will be relevant whether you're working in the public sector or the private sector. Some of the messages might be things you can take home, think about once you get back to base. Before we kick off in earnest, I'd just like to ask you a question, if that's okay. How many of you have heard of the National Audit Office? About 50%, maybe?
Yeah, we should probably apologise to the 50% that have.
Yeah. For those of you that for those of you that have heard of us, how many of you had to work with us at any point in time? I think that's about 3, actually, so not too many. So probably a great opportunity for us to put what we do in a bit of context for those of you that know a little less about the National Audit Office, because that's an important part to give the backdrop for the work that we've been doing and how the findings might be used.
We tossed the coin to say who's going to talk to you about what the NAO does. I lost. So our role, well, we're independent of government. Our role is to provide assurance and advice to Parliament on how government departments use public money, to promote better financial management, and key for us, value for money for the taxpayer. So we've got this phrase, this is the NAO's tagline, we have this unique perspective. What we mean by that is that we're incredibly privileged, Alec and I, particularly in our role. We've got this cross-government remit. We go into a number of organisations every year. The last month, I was thinking about it this morning, we've been into 7 different organisations. And it's a real privilege to go into these places, look at what they're doing, learn from it, and try and share it with other people. So we do have this unique perspective, and we're trying to drive Parliament to drive government to actually improve public services. The NAO's line on what improvement is to them, well, when you make a decision, have the evidence for it. Sounds simple, doesn't it? It can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Public money is better directed. Focus on the vital few. Focus on those priority areas. Get the resources to them as fast as possible so you can deliver. That financial management is actually robust. You know what you got. What's the problem we're trying to fix? Give the resources to fix it. How do we know when we're done? Proper financial management helps you. And essentially, we want government to spend wisely. In terms of impact, we kind of measure our impact in 2 key ways, all about cashable versus non-cashable, but looking at this, we aim to achieve public service improvement, so that's delivery to the taxpayer, financial impact, which I'll come to in a moment, and also improved accountability. People are being paid money to actually deliver services. We'd like to hold them to account for that, and we'd like government to be transparent. So in order to do that, we do a lot of work which we publish everything. So if ever you've got an hour that you've got nothing better to do, look at the NAO. I'm sure we've done something that you might be of interest in. I was looking actually on the website this morning. Over the last week, we've done work on flood defences, the BBC's efficiency programme. We've done work on the Research Council Shared Service Centre. We just do everything. So there might be something of interest there. But the thing for us, you know, when we were talking about proving the benefits, and people have mentioned this over the last couple of days, we know, and we don't audit it, someone else does that for us, but we've got a return of investment of at least 10 for 1. So just to hammer it home, we're not part of government, we're independent of government. If we start in the middle box there, government requests funding from Parliament, Parliament agrees or disagrees. We then come in and we look at, number 1, did they use that money for the purpose for which it was given? Number 2, do they account for it correctly? Alec and I aren't accountants, sorry to say. We work with 600 accountants, so you can imagine the Christmas party's fun. But thirdly, what we do, particularly Alec and I and our team, we look at was that money used to best effect? Economy, efficiency, effectiveness, value for money. So Alec, seamless transfer. What do we mean by government?
Well, I think Kate did quite a good job for that for us earlier. We're talking about the same parts of government that Kate talked about in her presentation. The 17 central departments, their agencies, their arm's length bodies that face off in the main to the customer. It is big, though. Kate's right, it is around 500,000 people. spending about £700 billion, thousands of locations across the UK and a presence in every country worldwide. So it is quite a complicated big beast.
Probably to put that into context, if you take the rest of the public sector, 500,000 people, there's about 6 million people who work in the public sector. So that's the bit we're looking at. But like anything, that's where the business rules are set for the rest of the system to work. As you can see, insightful analysis from the NAO up here. It's big, it's complicated. Government does everything. Think of your own organisations. The spread of activity that a government does is absolutely mind-blowing, from sending people to fight wars, buying lots and lots of things, answering a letter, fixing people in hospitals. Government does everything.
I think it does have the complications of any multinational or national companies that you work in. The silos within individual organisations trying to deliver to a customer that's pulling in one direction, but an organisation that's organised in a vertical fashion. But the complication as well, many of these taxpayers, many of the customers are looking for services that actually pop in and out of different government organisations, and actually into some private sector organisations as well that are part of that value stream. So it builds in quite a lot of complexity into the system.
And there are a few other things in terms of complications as well that are perhaps specific to the public sector. If we just think about your organisations and think that every about 4 years, you're starting to prepare for an entire new management team, and all those True North goals that you've had for 4 years might be completely reversed. Think about that. Think about a system where people are actually turning over in senior positions incredibly frequently. A couple of years max, 18 months, you've got a new management team in there. One of the other things as well is government is also usually the supplier of last resort. The customers might not actually want that service really, but they're getting it anyway. And for us, if you think of some of those examples, fixing people in hospitals, making sure that people have the benefits they need, it's actually a bit of a crime that we don't do this better.
So to give you a bit of an impression of why on earth are we even bothered in this as the NAO, well, Kevin set it out quite nicely in our reason for being. And we really need to get ahead of the game because government's looking at using lean to manage its business, deliver its business operations. It's important that we're ahead of the game so that we can actually assess how well they're doing that. We've referenced 2006 as well. Again, that was something that Kate mentioned, and this is when we saw more systematic approaches in government organisations to thinking about using lean, the principles behind lean, various other different methods to try and improve business performance. So organisations like Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, DWP, but also the Ministry of Defence, the Home Office and others.
And just for the record, the NAO thinks that lean's a really good idea. It's a good thing. But like with anything that we write, we always say but at the end of it. We've seen some examples of how those core principles, if you think back to the work that Dan and Jim published all those years ago, think back to those principles and see whether they're actually being manifested in some of the things that are being badged as lean around the public sector. I promise you they're not.
So all in all, we need to make sure that we've got the capability to ensure that government's getting it right. And again, that's put myself and Kevin in a very privileged position. We've had a lot of investment in ourselves so that we can go out and assess the rest of government. We have managed to work with people like Dan. We have managed to go to the reference source tutorial to have a look at how they would do things, how they think about their business, to try and help us translate that into the government environment. So we're pretty good now. We think we've got a good understanding of what government can be doing in order to improve its business performance by using these principles.
So, it was about 18 months ago, wasn't it? The CNAG stands for Comptroller and Auditor General, so that's Chief Exec to you. But that's the head of our office. He gave us a challenge. He gave us a business problem, to be honest. He asked us to go out and figure these two things out. How capable is government in terms of managing its business operations? But what are government's business problems? So, obviously, we thought we'd get that done in a couple of days and then we'll take the rest of the year off. So, essentially, what we had to do was have a think. How do we do this? As Alec said, government's huge. It does everything. So, where do we start? How can we do this? So, we decided to develop a bit of an analytic a way of, if we're walking a consistent way of going into different organisations and seeing what they do and what their problems are. So then we can come up with a few common weaknesses, common opportunities across the public sector, and then feed that back to government to hopefully help them use it. So we went away, we looked at all the existing models out there.
And stole with pride.
Absolutely. No sense in reinventing the wheel if you can't help it. But what we did find is that those characteristics, those real things that you need in order to properly understand whether something's happening or not, wasn't really there for us. So we decided to work with some absolutely brilliant people. You know, again, utter privilege. Dan, you were heavily involved in developing the model. Again, we went and tested it with Toyota, which was good fun. We worked with some great people in the public sector who've been doing this for several years and then came up with this analytic. So, we kind of told you what the purpose was. Government spends a lot of money and needs to be better at this. Kate set out the challenge perfectly to government at the moment. To understand the current state, we came up with this thing. There's 5 big handfuls of stuff that we look at. Strategy, using strategy to actually define and drive what you do. Information to manage and improve process performance. Helping people manage and improve. Looking at end-to-end process, linking this to demand. And then if any of those things, if you've got that red flag going up, well, there's when your continuous improvement can come in and start helping. I've been asked a couple of times, actually, in the bar. You might have seen us there. Why did
alone.
We're auditors, we do drink alone. Process management, why did we come up with that? Well, there's 2 answers. One is we haven't got much of an imagination, so we thought that pretty much does it. But the second thing is, do you all remember the Onotaichi quote when he talks about brilliant people in broken processes? Do you remember what he said immediately before that? So Toyota, brilliant process management is our strategy. And that's what we aspire to for government too. So that's why we call it that.
So what does that mean in practice? Well, if Kevin and I were to arrive at your organisation tomorrow, this is what we'd go out and do with you. Essentially, we look at whether or not the characteristics of strong process management are in place at what we've called the organisational level. And essentially, I guess that's the, to steal Jim's word from the other day, the management system that's in place. The things that create the DNA of the way in which the rest of the organisation might operate and might behave. And we look at what we call the operational level, so where the work is actually done, so some business processes. And we use that, looking at business processes, as a way to see whether or not those things we hear and see at the organisational level are those characteristics pervading at the operational level. What we decided to do was, we've got £700 billion worth of expenditure to go out and test to see whether or not the characteristics of strong process management are in place to actually manage the value for money of that expenditure delivery. We decided that perhaps we couldn't look at all the processes that government does in order to come to our judgment. So very noble of us, we decided to try and catch government at its best and went into each organisation that we assessed and said, show us your best processes, show us what you're most proud of. And actually, when you do that, can you choose something that's critical to your customer? We want to look at your process that you think is the most important for your customer. And can we also look at the process which you're most proud of, your best process? Now, surprisingly for us, sometimes those processes weren't the same ones. So the critical one for their customer wasn't necessarily the one that they thought was best, and that just kind of made us ponder for a second why that might be the case. We also looked for a third process, and that was something so that we could do a bit of benchmarking, something that is common to all organisations in government, be it allocating funds to someone to spend in another part of your organisation or in another organisation, or even answering letters. Kevin mentioned that at the start, and it sounds so minor, but in government organisations this can be quite important because it's the reputation of the department. It's the permanent secretary that's getting a letter from a member of the public that doesn't answer it, that doesn't treat it in the way it ought to be treated. So it is actually quite a high reputational risk.
So we've got 40 questions. Across the 5 areas at the top, strategy, information, people. We've got 270 characteristics that we'll go and test, and it's binary. It's either there or it isn't. That's it. There is no amber for us either.
What we'll ask when we go in is, we're very interested in, are you mature? And it's Kevin's point there. You know, it's binary, yes or no. Being the audit office, we then want to say, can you prove it? And we're not just interested in whether or not someone can tell you that they do something. We actually want to see it in practice. And being the very complex people that we are, the way that we go about this is we ask the organisation to tell us what it is they'd like us to read, who it is they'd like us to talk to, and what is it that you'd like us to see, observe happening. And to be quite frank, we don't really give two hoots about the first two of those, because if it's not happening in practice, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So we place a lot of emphasis on what we see happening in the workplace.
So it's common to everything that people have been talking in the dining rooms and in the sessions today and yesterday. We just go and see it. We go and see where the value is created and see what's happening. What do staff in government actually have to help them do their job? So anyway, this is the results for government at its best.
So I'll just give you a quick run through of what's up on the screen there. You can probably not read everything that's on there, but essentially this is the aggregate result for government, for central government. It incorporates an assessment of 12 government organisations in total. The 5 charts just represent the areas that Kevin talked you through, so the strategy information. So across the top we've got the strategy, the scores for information, and the scores for people. And at the bottom left we have the scores for the process section and the scores for the improvement section. You might have remembered Kevin said there is no amber. Spot the difference. You might also wonder why we decided to introduce an amber, and you might remember that Kevin said we think lean is a good thing for government. There's a lot of red on there and not much else, so it might have painted quite a bleak picture if we hadn't introduced our amber. Essentially, the 2 other colours we've got, the yellow this is partial maturity, so we saw some of the characteristics that we were going out to look for, by no means everything. The kind of yellow and green shaded bit in between, that's where we saw some of the characteristics in place, and actually we were convinced by what we'd seen that there was activity in place that was embedded, that actually we had confidence if we came back again, they would have moved up the maturity scale. The green, for us that means full maturity, but in actual fact, what our test was world class. We don't mean world class for government, we mean world class. So it was quite a high bar that we set.
So each one of these columns here is one of our 40 questions. And Alec and I were not the brightest, so we brought in our colour experts to tell us where we should actually focus. So my little girl Amelie, who's 5, and my son Jamie, who's 8, I showed them the chart and we said, right, what do you think? I said, we think you should look at improvement, Daddy. Why is that? Well, it's the one with the most red. And I thought, yeah, those are my kids, fantastic. Half Yorkshire, half Japanese, all bleak. So, there's probably a couple of things just to point out. Improvement, yeah, we didn't see that much. But
we'll come to that later.
Yeah, we saw some fantastic stuff, though, which we'll get to. But there's a couple of questions as well, which I must admit, my daughter was only starting to read at that time, so she couldn't really read the question. I've talked to her about it. Question 16. So that's the one up here in people, 3 from the right, left. Do you look at it? Question 16. Doesn't look that bad in context, does it? This question is, do staff have the skills required to complete the process right first time? We've since done this in a lot of areas, and this score isn't getting any better. So if you think that 40% of the business processes we were in, the organisation didn't know. I'm not saying they didn't have the staff, but the organisation didn't know the skills that they had to complete the process right first time. We think that's a bit of an issue.
One of the other ones we'll just pick out down here, question 20 in the process section. This is one of the questions we asked at the organisational level, and this is about whether the organisation had clarity on how their process is delivered end-to-end to their customers. And again, we were quite concerned about the degree of red here, about 60% in that particular question. So a whole lot of information in there that we're just starting to make sense of, or trying to.
We need to get someone else to do that. One of the things, just to say, this is all published and it's all on the NAO's website, so if you want to have a look at it, and we've put in there things like what we mean by strategy, why is it important, examples of good things we saw. So it's all on the website and all the questions there and stuff. So if you're interested, have a look, and if you want to talk to us about it any time, just give us a call. But what we did do, it was great because we'd been out there. It took us a few months to go in and look at all these big organizations. We then had these 270 characteristics times, we did 14 departments, but we've only published 12 so far. So we got all these data points and all that kind of good stuff, wrapped it up. And remember the challenge, the business problem we were given by our chief exec? What are government's business problems? Not that process here. Is there anything across the piece that we need to highlight? So these are the 5 things.
So we've got the couple of points that we've talked about already, the customer demand. We talked about a point in the people section. So actually giving staff the obligation to improve was something that was an issue. I just want to talk about this one here, making the case for change, improving the benefits. So these are the 5 areas that we saw at best in government partial maturity, i.e. there was no one that was ever going to get any better from what we saw. So partial was the best they could aspire to unless something changes. So for us, that was a real performance gap. And making the case for change, improving the benefits, yeah, it might not be a surprise. National Audit Office interested in you're spending cash, what are you getting for it? But for us, we think that's really important because if you've got a choice of how you spend your cash, but you've got very little of it at the moment, you need to be pretty sure you're getting something for it. And if you're trying to decide where to invest, and someone comes to you and says, I want to do some work on my process to improve it, it will be good fun, and we'll have a nice day away, and we'll do an event, and all these kinds of things. And someone else is telling you that I could maybe install a new IT system, and this will give you the benefit. You need to be able to make sure that the person that's put in the place to make that decision is informed with the information they need in order to come to a reasonable judgment about where to place their chips in order to get the benefits they need for their organisation. And I think for us, that's the important thing about, we hear a lot about, if it wasn't for the leaders, everything would be fine. We think it's reasonable to actually furnish the leaders with some kind of information to help them too.
Move on? Yeah. So one of the other things that we did, which was quite cheeky, we always present things in terms of those 5 areas, the little stovepipes, but actually we designed the thing to run horizontally. There's themes that run through it. So we've done some further analysis, and this is hot off the press. I don't think anyone's seen this yet, and we haven't published it yet. So, you know, we're amongst a couple of hundred of our closest friends now. You're not going to tell anyone? Is that okay? Right. So we'll just talk it through. But essentially, we're looking at 3 big things. Control, measure, improve. That's our mantra. That's also the order we think it should be done. Establish control. Get your goal policy deployment in place. Get the strategy deployment. Make sure that you know that everything that your organisation is doing is actually either contributing to the customer base you are set up to serve or delivering against your organisation's objectives. If it's not, don't improve it, just stop doing it. Using information to measure performance and target improvement. We'll come back to that point a little bit later. And have a consistent approach to improving the priority areas, the vital few. So we've done this analysis. We've gone in, we've done regressions, correlations, all that good stuff. We've got teams of people with 2 heads at the NEO with brain size of planets who can do all this for us. And there's just 5 things we thought may or may not be of interest to you, but just to run through.
I think what's been really instructive for us is some of these messages we probably would have thought were the case, but because we've done this work, we're very kind of certain we've got all these data points that we've now tested, done all the clever work with, that we can prove that this is the case. The first one's a good example there. Those organisations that are performing well, they're typically the organisations which performed well at the organisation level. That gave them the ability to perform well at the operational level. So without having those management systems in place, the DNA, as I described it, in the organisation, it's very likely that you won't perform so well overall. Your business performance won't be so good, which, yeah, I guess we kind of thought that anyway, but this has proven it.
I guess to say it a different way, tactical point fixes will get you so far, and then they will not sustain. Second thing, Kate, you mentioned there's different kinds of departments when you were speaking. For us, what we did is we gave big handfuls, but we put departments into direct delivery to the taxpayer, versus those departments which we just call policy departments, i.e. they set the business rules, they write the policy, they hand out the cash. But even when they're doing exactly the same business process, delivery departments were way more mature. They were exhibiting all these characteristics that you'd expect to see. And we kind of thought, well, why is that? Answering a letter is answering a letter.
Third area here was a little bit troubling. We talked about the £700 billion that central government's spending. The organisations that we looked at accounted for about half of that spending. So you can imagine they're not responsible for spending that cash necessarily all themselves. They are giving out to others too. So, for example, the Department for Transport giving it to the Highways Agency to spend maintaining roads and so on. So we would have hoped that allocating resources, cash and people, would be something we'd want government to be really good at. But that's where we saw least maturity. Also, policy. A lot of the work of the central departments is creating the business rules for the way in which the rest of government operates, putting the rules in place. And again, that was another area where we saw least maturity.
One of the things that we did look at as well is when we split those business processes that were in our sample, we looked at about 50, but when we split them out to those that had had some sustained lean or continuous improvement, some process improvement activity on them, what we found is that it wasn't just the improvement bit that they did better on, actually the whole thing, that clarity of end-to-end, understanding performance, being able to spot when the red flag was about to go up rather than after it's gone up and then we firefight. They actually did better at everything.
And the fifth point here, what we observed was that of those organisations that we looked at, the ones that had the best business performance had this profile where, against the questions that we had classified as control questions, their profile was most mature, then measure, and then improve. So that kind of said to us, it might be a good idea to really get those things in place first. Now, we're not improvement consultants, but if we were, we might say that might be something to consider when you go into your own organisations. Think about these control, measure, and improve questions.
So just final slide, a few thoughts to leave you with. Notice we've got bullet points 555 all the way through this, haven't we? Right. It's exactly what Alex just said. We would really encourage you, we're not government's process improvement consultants. What we are the people who hold government to account. But we are encouraging government departments right now to think of control. How do you get control on your business? Do that first. Get your measurement systems in place. And then the great work that Kate's doing in the Cabinet Office, the continuous improvement will then help you continue that cycle of control, measure, improve, control, measure, improve.
You'll remember the second bullet there from the picture of all the charts that the improvement area was the weakest. What was interesting for us was that actually the root cause for those low scores in the improvement area were often traced back to somewhere else. We did these clever, I say we got someone else to do these clever regressions for us. And what they managed to identify was that the key question, which was controlling whether or not people were getting good scores in the improvement section, was whether or not at organisational level, at board level, people had good management information they were using to manage and improve their business. So they weren't just getting reports, they were actually using it to take decisions, target improvement on those vital few things.
And I guess the thing for us is we did a literally bar napkin, added up a few numbers last night. And we think that so far, it's not that government's just started on this stuff. We think that government's probably spent at least £500 million on lean continuous improvement so far. Top of a head figure, we might go ahead and prove that someday, but only if there's a reason to do it. So it's not day one. Government has invested an awful lot of money and established some of the capability that Kate's going to be able to draw on. But let's face it, government cannot afford to keep spending millions and millions of pounds on lean programs to improve business performance. To us, the whole idea of a lean program is a bit of an anathema, because when, bods like us turn up and do a maturity assessment, you've got a lean program. Well, that means you're probably not that mature yet, because it's different from business as usual.
think just to reiterate, these are questions, and we haven't got the answers necessarily to these. We are posing these as well. So if you've got any good ideas, please do approach us afterwards. But given what we've seen around the profiles around and performance around the control, measure, and improve questions that we tested, is it right to focus on the improvement end, which we do see obviously quite a lot of organisations across government doing the experiments around the tactical? They're great, but as Kevin said, they might only be able to get you so far.
And we go and have a chat with people in Toyota and things, and we talk to them about, why did you come up with this way? Why did you come up with that? Let's all remember, Toyota came up with these things because it made sense to them. Doesn't mean it has to be something that we use. And the final thing for us is, we need now to help government solve these problems. Do you remember the 5 common weaknesses that we put up? So what we're trying to do at the moment is contact a number of organisations who are actually good at this and see what was the problem they had, how did they go about solving it, what is it that government can therefore learn, to try and circumvent a lot of this so that we can actually, government needs to fix these problems now, not in 20 years' time. So it's a bit of a plea for help from us, really. If you know of organisations, the slides are going to be on the website, Dan. If you know of organisations that have got really good examples of they've had the problem of making the case for change, proving the benefits is the example, or understanding that level of demand and triggering control changes and all the 5 things that we're looking for. If you've got a good example, please get in touch, because we'd love to go and talk to that organisation and then share it in government. This could be helpful to you. I mean, of course, we're going to have to actually make sure it's true before we do that, so that's the kind of downside to it. But if you know of organisations, if you're of interest, please do get in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.